Liver King has been taking over the internet recently, and if you're one of the tiny few people who don't know who he is, he's a fitness influencer who promotes this ancestral way of living. So he has 9 ancestral tenets that are kind of how our ancestors used to live as hunter-gatherers, and promotes those as his way to live by. But recently it has been found out that he was on steroids the whole time, and so his physique is certainly not entirely due to those 9 ancestral tenets. So now he's received a ton of flack for that steroid use, and specifically because he lied about it the whole time. But I don't want to focus on the steroid use in this video, because one of the things that I'm worried about is now people have shifted their focus from what he was teaching completely to the steroid use. And I want to evaluate whether or not what he was teaching is actually valuable, if there's science to back it up. And so today we're going deep into the 9 ancestral tenets that Liver King promotes. I'm going to go into the peer-reviewed research as the gold standard of looking at whether or not these actually work, but then also in certain cases where the peer-reviewed research isn't really there or it's kind of hard to test, I'll look at some anecdotal evidence from other people in the health and fitness industry that I trust and respect, because peer-reviewed research, although it's great, can't always cover everything, so we will take that into account when necessary. We'll dive into each one, and then for each one I will give them a rating of 1 to 10 on how scientifically sound it is, where 1 is this is complete tomfoolery, like don't try this ever, versus 10 is this is fantastic, everyone should be doing it. So the 9 ancestral tenets are sleep, eat, move, shield, connect, cold, sun, fight, and bond. So first up is sleep. Liver King recommends getting early morning sun exposure at the same time every day, as well as enjoying the sunset as the day winds down, as these are cues to kind of set your circadian rhythms to the rising and setting of the sun. It says to finish your last meal 3 to 4 hours before bed, and then put on a pair of blue light blocking glasses so the blue light from your phone, artificial lights, don't trick you into thinking it's daytime all over again. And just so this is all clear, anything that is not italicized here is taken directly from Liver King's website that he publishes as his teachings. And then anything that is italicized is stuff that I have basically summarized just from other videos he's done or things he's talked about in other areas. I don't want to misrepresent him, but I've just tried to accurately summarize different things he says. So here one of them is Liver King sleeps on a solid wood platform, like no padding at all. And one of the things that I kept running into as I was doing research for this video is that sometimes what Liver King recommends to people and what he actually does are a little bit different. And on the one hand, I think that's fine because Liver King is a completely different person from everyone else. His lifestyle isn't necessarily the same as the average person, and so obviously he's allowed to do different things, live slightly differently. But at the same time, I think part of his message is look at how I live exactly how I live, and then you'll be able to get the results that I'm getting. And I think sometimes that runs into issues where for the average person it's not feasible, and it's also just not a good idea for them to try to follow the exact same pattern as how he lives. And so this is one example of that, that's sleeping on wood, that we will get into in just a few minutes. Now the science for sun exposure has over the past few years become really, really solid. Just one example, this 2022 paper by Brown et al. Looked at a bunch of different expert recommendations from sleep experts, and they came to the conclusion that light early in the morning and then also throughout the day is extremely beneficial in regulating our circadian rhythms and therefore improving sleep. I know Stanford professor Andrew Huberman has talked a ton about this and basically said the evidence is super clear that viewing sunlight early in the day as well as when the sun is setting, so in the evening, and even throughout the day if possible, is super beneficial. This seems pretty solid, so I won't go into too much more depth there. On the eating 3 to 4 hours before bed, it's a little bit less clear, but the science does say that food regulates our circadian rhythms. If you eat a meal, it's kind of telling your body, okay, we need to be awake, we need this energy because we're going to expend it in some way. And so there is a couple studies, like this 2017 one by Melkani and Panda, found that limiting your food intake to a 12-hour window helps regulate your circadian rhythms better, and therefore has beneficial effects on things like insulin levels, weight gain, and sleep, because that's kind of mimicking your circadian rhythm, the natural rising and setting of the sun. Those same people did another study in 2019 and found kind of the same thing. What they said here was there was pervasive benefits on multiple organ systems, which basically just said it is a good idea to not eat too late into the evening because that will disrupt your circadian rhythm, which can have some bad effects. Blue light has also been shown consistently to disrupt our sleep, so you do want to avoid that as much as possible. If you don't want to get blue light glasses, like Liver King suggests, you can get different filters. I have one on my computer, I have one on my phone, and just make sure you're turning off like big overhead lights right before you go to sleep. That will accomplish pretty much the same thing, and the science is quite good there. The sleeping on the floor, though, turns out there are a number of people who talk a lot about the benefits of this. They say it helps improve back pain or improves your posture, things like that. But basically, all of the claims here are anecdotal, just people who say, this has been helpful to me. There's not really any scientific research to back this up. But there was a 2015 systematic review that showed that a medium firm mattress had basically all of the same benefits that people talk about for sleeping on the floor or on a hard surface. And so basically it comes down to just make sure that you get the right mattress and you should be okay. Now you could sleep on the floor if you want, but the thing is, I've slept on the floor a number of times in my life, more than I should have, honestly, but the thing is, it is painful. Like, it just hurts. For most people, it's not comfortable to sleep on the floor. If it is for you, great, do it. But for me, sleep is such an important thing for your overall health and well-being that it doesn't really make sense to risk it here. Like, if you can get good sleep in a mattress, just do that. Liver King says that a mattress will make you soft, but I think it's okay being a little soft as long as you get good sleep. So overall rating here, I will give him a 9 out of 10. It's looking pretty good besides the sleeping on the floor thing. All right, next up is eating. So Liver King recommends getting rid of processed foods, seed oils, liquid calories, and incorporating more whole foods like liver, bone marrow, heart, and bones. In his videos, Liver King eats almost entirely a meat-based diet. Turns out that's not actually completely true. He eats a lot of stuff that isn't just meat, but from my experience with his videos, that's always how it seems to look. And I think that is perhaps detrimental because for many people, eating entirely a meat-based diet, a carnivore diet, isn't really feasible and may not be the most effective for them. So I think that's one area where people kind of get misled by the way he's doing it versus what he recommends. But the science here is pretty solid. I mean, in terms of incorporating whole foods and not eating processed foods, like we've known that for a while. That's very beneficial. Benefits of bone marrow and liver. There's a number of really good benefits. Bone marrow has a bunch of collagen, glycine, things like that have been shown to improve joint health, decrease inflammation, things like that. Liver is one of the most nutritionally dense foods on the planet. It's fantastic. Just make sure you're getting good sources of it. One other thing to mention that Liver King does is he says he eats testicles every day, like usually bull testicles. It says that's good for your testosterone because since testosterone is made in the testes, the idea is if you eat them, that'll boost your testosterone. There is no evidence to support this. The testes don't store testosterone, they just make it. And so that's not really how that works. It's kind of a pseudoscience. So overall rating here, I will give him an 8 out of 10. I would say even if you never ate liver, but you cut back on processed foods and ate more whole foods, you'd be doing great. Number 3 is move. So Liver King recommends walking. He walks for 30 minutes in the morning, usually in the afternoon, and then after dinner as well. Try to get 10,000 steps every day and vary your workouts so you're constantly pushing yourself. But then again, in the way that he lives his life, Liver King works out twice per day and like really pushes himself every single workout. So just to jump right to that one, that is the biggest case where the steroids are helping him. For the vast majority of people, if you are working out at the level that he is, and doing it that consistently, you're going to end up overtraining. Your body's not going to be able to recover, and that wouldn't be healthy. But Liver King is on steroids that help him recover much more quickly. He's on testosterone. So that is something that I would not recommend trying to repeat without really understanding yourself and the science behind it in order to make sure that you're not overtraining. The other stuff is pretty good, but it's also fairly general, like go out for walks, work out. So I won't go too in-depth there because the science is pretty solid. I would say he could get a little more specific though. So here I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Now we are getting into the fun stuff. So number 4 is shield. And here Liver King talks about avoiding different dangers that exist in our current world. So some of those are going to be seed oils, excessive Wi-Fi, EMFs, which stands for electromagnetic fields, and man-made poisons. So he suggests not keeping your cell phone by your genitals, turn off Wi-Fi at night, and stop wearing perfume. Now, is there science to back up this stuff? I've got to be honest here, when I started looking at this specific tenet, I was expecting to give him like a 2 out of 10 at most, because I thought a lot of this stuff is just woo-woo, there's nothing to back it up. But as I was looking into the research, it's pretty interesting. So, for example, there was a rodent study published in 2018 by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which they said found clear evidence of carcinogenicity from cell phone radiation. So that just means it causes cancer. And there was another meta-analysis of 46 case-controlled studies that found this same thing. And I'll read you one of the main takeaways here. It says, our main takeaway from the current review is that approximately 1,000 hours of lifetime cell phone use, or about 17 minutes per day over a 10-year period, is associated with a statistically significant 60% increase in brain cancer. And then there was 250 scientists signed this paper in 2015 saying that they were very worried about electromagnetic fields. Each of these 9 ancestral tenets will look through the peer-reviewed research on, but they didn't really link to a lot of research. And so basically, to summarize, there's a lot of research. Most of it has been done in rodent studies, though, that has shown some dangers of radiation frequency that comes from our cell phone or from Wi-Fi. Both of those emit radiation. That has shown that it is detrimental or at least risky in terms of causing an increase in cancer. But then there are a bunch of other scientists who come back and say, no, this has actually never really been replicated in humans, and even the studies with mice are kind of iffy. There's all these different issues with them. And so many people have said we're not worried about this. And from my experience with research, what I think is happening here is there's this thing where oftentimes even peer-reviewed research is not perfect, and so people can design studies or find results in ways that aren't completely accurate or true, and then can use that to support different claims. Like there are a number of things where this happens. Like turmeric is one example where every year it seems like there's a couple new studies about how turmeric will cure basically everything, but then other people say, no, it's just kind of differences in the way you measure certain things in the studies, and there's a lot of issues, and turmeric, maybe it's good, but it's not a magical cure, you know? So I think a similar thing is happening here, which means basically it is unclear, but it is probably worth being concerned about. Anecdotally, I have heard that Andrew Huberman, who I mentioned earlier, who's a Stanford professor, has said he's kind of wary of keeping his phone by his balls for that reason, for long periods of time. I know another guy I trust in this space, Tim Ferriss, has said that he's actually bought a cell phone case to prevent some of this radiation, just because the idea is they're kind of hedging. In case this is dangerous, they want to be on top of it early so it doesn't hurt them long term. Another one that Liver King talks about is perfumes. Basically what happened, they passed a law in 1996 that said perfume manufacturers don't have to publish what they're actually putting into their perfume or cologne because they don't want to make them reveal trade secrets, so they can just list things as the ingredient is fragrance instead of actually saying what the chemical is. But they know that to make a cologne or a perfume, you're just combining all of these chemicals, and many of them aren't actually tested by the FDA. A lot of them, we don't even know what's in the perfume, so there's no way to tell whether or not this is safe, and that's pretty worrying to me, honestly. We do know that many cosmetic products, including colognes and perfumes, contain phthalates, hard word to pronounce, but are basically these compounds that we know are harmful to humans, especially to fertility in both men and women. And they're in a bunch of things, and kind of in the past decade or so, I would say, we've started to realize the dangers of phthalates. And so more research needs to be done here, but I'd actually be pretty worried about different colognes or perfumes, especially if you don't know what's going into it. There's a lot of worrying compounds out there, and it's basically all chemicals, so you're just putting a bunch of chemicals on your body. Over a long period of time, that's probably not healthy. That's my take. Seed oils are another one that have come under a lot of flack recently. And basically, my take that I've heard someone summarize it as this, which makes sense from what I've seen, is that a lot of the disdain for this comes from influencers on the internet who hate on these seed oils and not actually from the research. The short of it here is that seed oils probably aren't good for you, and there are better alternatives. But if there's no trans fats in them, and if it's in moderation, you'll probably be okay. But if you can find different alternatives like an olive oil or a coconut oil, that would tend to be better. So overall rating here, I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10, but there's a high margin for error there because we don't really know what the truth is on many of these subjects. So Liver King might be onto something. I don't know. Number 5 is connect. So here at Liver King recommends something called grounding, which is honestly a little bit more woo-woo in that space, but the idea of it is that, he kind of explains it here, the Earth has a slightly negative charge which provides a grounding force for our electrophysiology. And so The point being that we don't really spend much time connecting with the earth anymore because we've got all these rubber shoes and houses, and like we're rarely actually touching the earth, and that's bad for us. And so there are a number of benefits of connecting with the earth. People will say grounding is kind of good for everything, to be honest. But his recommendation is to start with 10 minutes, which would just be, say, standing outside in the grass or in the dirt, actually feeling your bare feet on the earth. And it says to pay attention and see how you feel. Now, this is actually something I've looked into before, and basically there is some evidence for it in the literature, but it gets really tricky because almost all of it was paid for by these pro-grounding companies, like companies that will sell products to help you do grounding. And some of their products are, honestly, I think just really weird. It seems like it's too fake. For example, there are some that will sell a mat that is made of dirt, or like a little box full of dirt, and you're supposed to just stand in that and it's supposed to do the same thing. And to me, that seems completely different from going outside and actually like walking around on the grass or walking around on the dirt. That seems, I don't know, that just doesn't quite sit right with me. Like, if I'm going to connect with the earth, I think you should be outside, but that's what they sell. But to give them their due, there was this one small study that tracked people's cortisol levels before and after 8 weeks of sleeping on a conductive mattress pad. So it was one of these kind of grounding pads. And they found that they had better sleep, better stress relief, fell asleep faster, experienced less anxiety. But there are a number of issues with this study. For example, it was a very small sample size, and all of the people were selected, not randomly, but just like chosen people who were kind of interested in grounding were just able to sign up. And I think there was some pretty strong biases here towards getting the results that they wanted. So I don't put a ton of weight on this, but I will say, anecdotally, there are a number of people who do it. The biohacker Dave Asprey does this, talks a lot about it. And I just think personally, whenever I'm outside in the summer, like in the grass or in the forest, like something just feels really good about that. I do think there's value to being in nature, and certainly the benefits of actually connecting with nature, like taking a walk through the woods, have been shown to have positive effects on mood, well-being, reducing stress. They've done studies on these. And so anecdotally, I think this makes sense. It's probably not going to cure everything, but I'd say connect with nature. Like it is a part of how we have grown up as a human species, how we've evolved, and I think it's important. Obviously, test that out. If you go out in nature and hate it, like don't do it. It's not a big deal, but I think a lot of people find value in it. So overall, I'll give him a 6 out of 10 here. Next, we're talking about cold. So here, Liver King talks about kind of our ancestral history of how we're often very cold as a species and adapted to be okay with that. His suggestion is to start with cold-hot contrast showers, so going from hot to cold for 30 seconds at a time and kind of notice how you feel afterwards. I know that he actually does ice baths as well. The science behind this is honestly rock solid. Like, we have seen so much evidence that cold exposure is really good for you. There are a number of benefits, including reduced inflammation, it strengthens your immune system, your nervous system, speeds up recovery, it's good for fat loss. Less studied in the science, but anecdotally, a lot of people claim that it increases your willpower by forcing yourself to do something hard, especially early in the morning. You kind of prove that you can get over this initial resistance to doing something like that, and that develops that habit of you pushing yourself. It also improves mood, many people say. And I will agree with that. I take cold showers almost every morning for that reason. And the number of people who do ice baths or some sort of cold exposure every day is astounding. Like Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman, tons of professional athletes. So this is really solid. The one thing I will say is the science has been clear that if you are working to build big muscles to optimize for hypertrophy, don't do cold exposure right after a workout, because that basically reduces the inflammation in your muscles, and that inflammation is part of what makes those muscles grow. So if you're trying to get big, don't do it right after. Give yourself at least 2 hours of time after a workout to do cold exposure. But besides that, here I've got to give 10 out of 10 to the Liver King. Now we'll get into sun, and we'll get a little controversial here. But what Liver King recommends is getting midday sun exposure, and says this gives a number of benefits, improves energy, improves metabolism, optimizes immunity, different metabolic functions, stuff like that. And also, Liver King suns his balls, so like he just goes out naked into, I guess, his lawn and just will tan out there, and says that is good for boosting testosterone. So the science here says 50% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. That's the same for a lot of countries around the world. And also one thing that I didn't know but makes sense is that vitamin D production is highest at midday, so that midday recommendation is pretty good one, because one, that's when the sun is strongest, but also it turns out that your body is most efficient at producing vitamin D from the sun at midday. There's 2 studies that showed that. You can still get vitamin D from the sun other times, it's just going to take a little longer, but no biggie. The thing on sunning your balls, he does reference this study done in the 1930s, and it gets a little intense. I'm going to defer to Derek from More Plates, More Dates, who's already talked about this at length. It says basically, although his androgen was increased, it wouldn't amount to any noticeable level, and anything else looking at this has found there's really no evidence to support it. So overall rating, 10 out of 10 for sun advice, 2 out of 10 for sunning your balls advice. The 8th ancestral tenet is fight. Basically what he's talking about here is looking for opportunities to push yourself out of your comfort zone. He says opportunities that scare the shit out of yourself, and start with simple things that can create novelty, like brushing your teeth with the other hand, crossing your arms left over right, or sitting in a different chair a different way, stuff like that. And kind of pushing yourself to do things that make you think different and push you outside of your comfort zone. In terms of the more fighting aspect of it, Liver King also does go hunting. He's shown that in a number of clips and videos, and we'll talk about that as well. So here, Liver King's advice is kind of general, but there is a lot of evidence to support the idea that pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and engaging in competition, especially winning that competition, can be helpful to boost testosterone, as well as other helpful hormones. And I dug into a bunch of other interesting studies related to kind of the more fighting and violence aspect, because I was curious about that. So we'll dive into that. So there was this 1992 study that showed an increase in testosterone after winning a competition. Similarly, it's been shown that other animals who win fights show increased levels of testosterone. But then interestingly, there's this other study that looked at judo competitors and found that post-match testosterone was correlated not with the outcome, so not just winning or losing, but with the individual's satisfaction of the outcome. So if they thought they really pushed themselves hard in that competition, if they really had to struggle for it, then their testosterone was higher, which I think is really interesting, because it's not about just winning or losing, but kind of the effort you put in to get there, if you feel like you had to work for it. Then there was, looking at humans, this meta-analysis that showed large increases in certain hormones after winning fights in striking combat sports, so like MMA. So some of those were adrenaline, HGH, but this one did find that the changes in testosterone were insignificant, so who knows. And then the one thing I was curious about was the actual hunting aspect of it, because that was a very big piece of our ancestral lives. That is something that we needed to do, we needed to be successful at in order to survive as a species. And so there's this 2014 study by Trumbull et al. That showed successful hunting increases testosterone and cortisol in a subsistence population. So they looked at these hunter-gatherers and found that that consistently correlated to increased levels of testosterone. Another really interesting one that I had heard about recently is that simply interacting with guns increased levels of testosterone in men. So that's kind of interesting. And in case you don't know, higher testosterone is linked to levels of higher aggression, sex drive, risk-taking behavior in men. Is typically thought of the hormone that makes men more manly. You could think of it like that. It's not quite scientific, but close enough. So the overall rating, I wish he gave a little more examples here, got a bit more specific, and I certainly would not recommend getting into fights just to raise your testosterone, but overall I will give this a 9 out of 10. I think it's good advice, and certainly pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone is important for growth and development. Alright, and then the last one is bond. So this one is all about connecting with the people around you, loved ones, even dogs. And so he just says, start by simply spending focused present time with loved ones and friends. We've always needed each other, and we still do. One interesting piece of science I learned about a long time ago is that there's this book called The Blue Zone Solution, and it looks at these different, they call them blue zones, which are areas around the earth where people, far more than you would typically expect, live to exceed 100 years old, so where people are living for a really long time. And one of the key factors that they found that was consistent in all of these different blue zones was social connection. So people had to feel like they had a sense of community. They had to feel like people had their back, that they could count on others, and that they had close friendships and close relationships. And that was a big part of them living that long. This is one of those areas where it's a little bit harder to do a bunch of research on the benefits of social connection, but the evidence is out there. I think even people can just kind of think about their own lives. Like, it really sucks to be lonely. It sucks when you're separated from all the people you want to be around, and some of the best moments are the ones that we share with other people. And spending time with our friends or family has been shown to increase serotonin, dopamine, all these kind of feel-good chemicals. So I don't think we need a ton of science here. We know this is important. Go out and do it. So I would give this overall a 10 out of 10. So that is it. That is all 9 ancestral tenets that the Liver King teaches. I have to say I was pretty surprised. I knew a little bit of this going in, but a lot of the stuff I expected to be kind of unfounded and was him just coming up with this stuff because it kind of fit his narrative. But from a purely scientific standpoint, much of what he's saying makes sense and is good advice. The one thing to remember, though, is that just because you live by these 9 ancestral tenets does not mean you are going to look like Liver King. Again, he was on steroids. That has a very big effect on his physique. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when he is teaching about things that are valuable. So I think this is one of those cases where we can separate the person doing the teaching from the actual teaching itself, the ideas he's trying to spread, and those ideas are valuable based purely on the science. What the science says is they are, for the most part, supported. Regardless of how you feel about Liver King, you're totally entitled to your own opinion, but from a scientific standpoint, I have to say much of what he's recommending is pretty sound, pretty good advice.